What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to Brotherhood of Torque. Today we have another exciting project on the 7.3 Excursion. Today we are going to be changing the AC compressor and getting the AC system running again. Well, like I said, we are going to be working on the AC system on this thing. If you remember, we did an AC system upgrade on this a while back, and while it was working real good, the AC compressor finally decided to puke its guts and dump all the charge. It doesn't look like it, but it dumped everything out. So today we're going to replace it and the accumulator. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, before we start anything, we're going to make sure that the system's empty. Now, I know for a fact that it is because I'm pretty sure the compressor seal failed, but this is how you check the pressure on an AC system. This is what's called a manifold gauge set, and a really similar set of gauges is used on residential, commercial, industrial, and pretty much every other kind of air conditioning. Now, unlike your coolant system or a fuel tank, you can't see how much refrigerant is in an AC system because it's a sealed system. Unless it's a really, really unique situation, you won't have a sight glass. Some of the older cars had sight glasses on them, but 99% of them don't. So the only way you know how much is in there is by actually looking at these gauges. Now, in an AC system, pressure and temperature play a very important role. And as the pressure increases, so will your temperature. That's why on systems, automotive systems, it's extremely critical to have the right charge, which is why you'll usually have, stickers down here or over here that tells you exactly how much refrigerant goes in it. Because on a residential or commercial system, there's no two that are the same. You'll have, different lengths of lines. The outside unit, which is called the condensing unit, might be 5 feet further away from the house than, say, your neighbor's house. So it's a very dynamic setup. There's no set capacity for any system unless they know how long the lines are. Now, some of the little mini split systems that you see in like offices and whatnot, they'll sell them with a certain amount of hose so they know how much refrigerant goes in there. But a majority of systems that are installed don't have a template, so you have to look at the pressures to figure out if you've had enough in there or not. But on a vehicle system, they know how much to put in there because the hoses are a certain length, your AC condenser in the front's a certain size, your evaporator is a certain size, so that's why they provide you these stickers so you know. But like I said, before I do anything, I want to hook up and make sure that the system's empty. Now, you can see that the needles are flat and these are open. Now, this is your low side, which is where you normally add the refrigerant. And it's low side because this line is the suction side to the compressor. So the compressor's sucking the refrigerant in through this line. So this will be the low side. And then this smaller one is the discharge side. So after the compressor has squeezed the refrigerant, it sends it out this line. And this is your high side service port. And that line goes to your condenser to basically get rid of all the heat. And essentially what the AC system does is we'll start here with this suction line. So you'll have vapor, you'll have cool refrigerant vapor at this point, and it'll get sucked into the compressor. And then once it gets into the compressor squeezes it into a liquid. It takes all the little molecules that are kind of, floating around separate, with space in between them, and it squeezes them together. And the reason it does that is it squeezes them into liquid and sends it through the AC condenser, because it's easier to cool a liquid, but it sends it through the AC condenser because if the molecules are squeezed together tighter, then as it goes through the condenser, it can give off more heat than if it was vapor. So it goes ahead and passes the liquid through there. Then once the liquid's done going through the condenser, it comes back and it'll come back up here, and this is where your orifice tube lives. This is basically what's called your expansion device. So there's a little brass tube in the end of the orifice, and as the liquid refrigerant goes through it and expands into a vapor, it gets really cold. It's the same theory and same thing you'll see as if you hold a can of hairspray too long or a can of spray paint, it gets cold. The AC system works on exactly the same premise, except it's, you know, not spraying it out into the open to be lost. It's, you know, reusing it. So that's pretty much what it's doing. So once it flashes into a vapor and goes through the AC evaporator here, the hot air from the cab is blown over the evaporator. It cools the air, and then that vapor is sucked back out of the evaporator into this accumulator. Now, an accumulator has a couple different functions. There's a bag of desiccant in here which will absorb moisture, kind of like the little packets you see in a beef jerky bag or, you know, shipping boxes that says do not eat. It will absorb the moisture, and this acts as like a reservoir. This will help store extra refrigerant, so if you're sitting at a light idling for a while, your AC will still stay relatively cold. So it's basically a storage unit for the excess refrigerant, and it allows it to and it has a filter in there that'll, you know, catch contaminants. So that's essentially how the system works. Now, the system only works if there's a pressure differential, because you need your high and your low side, which is exactly what the compressor does. But over time, the compressor will wear out and you won't get your pressure differential anymore. And so that's when you'll have to start looking at it. So I went ahead and hooked up the low side and the high side, made sure they were open, made sure these were open, and there's nothing coming out. So you can see that it's flat. So what we're gonna go ahead and do is get started at taking the compressor off. Okay, so what we're gonna do now is loosen the belt. Now, the belt tensioner on the 7.3 is right down here, so it's actually pretty easy compared to some of the other ones. So this is what you do. You pull it towards you and it will relax the belt. So the easiest place to take it off is actually the alternator. So you just pull it, take the belt off, and let it roll back. And simple as that. 6.0 one's kind of a pain in the butt, but either way. So we're gonna go ahead and take the belt off the AC compressor and get our 3/8 ratchet with the 10 mil on it. Break these loose. Now, before we take this off, we're gonna have to disconnect the electrical connector, which has been getting smacked. You can see it's starting to grind because the pulley in the clutch had too much slop in it, so it started actually eating into the side of the compressor. So we can leave this electrical connector here, and we got to take this nut on the back of it off. Okay. Now, you're working on one of these, you want to leave at least one side of the gauges hooked up so that if any pressure does build up in it while you're working on it, it doesn't have a chance to pop off and possibly harm you. So run this guy out. They'll come to a point where I can actually just move the line and pull it off like that. So get him out of the way. And we're gonna go ahead and take the rest of the bolts out. Now you can see a little bit of oil dripping because now that I opened it up, there's refrigerant in that oil that's flashing off to the atmosphere. And got a little towel because we don't want it dripping too much down in there. So kind of tilt it and dump some of it out. Now this does have a dye in it, so it'll make your fingers green, which, you know, isn't the end of the world, but just be aware. Go ahead and dry it off. And turn this inside out and put it back. Okay. I'm gonna clean these bolts off before I put it back. Okay, so the screws are out. Now it's time to pull the compressor. Now it shouldn't be on there too good. And that's how you get it out. Now while I'm in here, like I said, I'm going to change the accumulator because the system's been opened and I don't want any debris walking through the system and causing trouble. But to do that, I have to unclip this little tube right here. It's got little jaws on it. So, okay, like I said, I have to get this little jaw off to get the accumulator out of the way. And also need to do is disconnect this electrical connector going to it. It's the low pressure switch. Okay, that's off. Okay, got that unplugged. Now I need to break this junction loose. I went ahead and got this loose right there, so we can go ahead and proceed. And now we're gonna get ready to get the accumulator out, so we're gonna take the pressure switch off. Now what this switch does is it watches the system pressure, and if it's too low, it will not allow the compressor to enable because it's trying to protect it. So got that off. Now get these little metal guys off. This one down here is not fun. And there's one over here. And it should be one down there on the bottom. Now to get this accumulator out, there's 2 screws over here you can take out. Or I'm gonna try to take it out over here. Now because this is an excursion, you have these heater lines in the way which go to the rear heater core, which kind of make it a pain in the butt. So we're gonna go ahead and take this guy out and see where we stand. All right, to free up a little more room, we're gonna go ahead and pull this line off the top of it. It's gotta come off anyway. So go ahead and slowly remove it and get it up out of the way. Now we can proceed, get this guy out. All right, so what we're gonna do on this one, because those screws are behind the lines, and I could take them off, but I gotta disconnect the lines and try to get them out of the way. But if this is just a standard Super Duty, it'll be a lot easier because ours aren't there. So we're gonna just pull that, rotate it like so, and open that up, pull it towards us a little bit, get it off that, pull it forward, and lift it out of the way. Now, that's what the accumulator looks like now. You could not change it when you're doing the compressor, but it's always a good idea to do it, especially if the compressor, destroyed itself, because otherwise you'll have a bunch of contamination in here. You don't want to start a fresh system with contamination. So we're going to go ahead and look at the other one. Wow, it's the original one. It's been on here for a long time. Since the accumulator's out, we're going to go ahead and change the orifice. Now, like I told you earlier, the orifice is the point of expansion where the refrigerant expands and becomes cold. And there's all sorts of different types of orifice tubes. Now, you guys saw me install the variable orifice tube when I did this last time. So I'm gonna pull that out though to make sure it's not contaminated. Okay, gonna take one of these little release tools. Ford uses them on their fuel lines and all sorts of other stuff. So there's a little spring in there that you have to spread apart to pull the line out. So you put that on there, pull it towards the fitting, and then just like that. Then the orifice tube will be right in there. So you get your pliers, usually has a little flat duckbill on there. You grab it and, in theory, and pull it towards you. And note its orientation when it goes in. The screen is pointing this way. So this one, there's a little bit of debris on it. I'm gonna go ahead and put a different one in just because Yeah, there's some debris on it. I just don't want to reuse it if it's been polluted. So this excursion calls for PEG 46 refrigerant oil. That's the spec. So I take a little bit, put it on these rings. Lube these guys up. Put the cap on so you don't spill it. Ask me how I know. Now, as you can see, in case you got confused, there's an arrow on here which is showing you which way the refrigerant's going. And the refrigerant's going from the high side through the orifice into the evaporator. So you know which way it goes in. Push that in and check the O-rings. Now these O-rings aren't very old because, like I said, I just worked on this system last year, so we're going to reuse them. Push it back, listen for the click. Boom, there's the click. Take your quick disconnect tool off, and you can see it's not going to let go. So next thing we will do is put the new accumulator in. Now when we put the accumulator in, we're going to put some refrigerant oil in it. Now this excursion, minimum operating charge rate, maximum lubricant charge volume. So right here it says for 14 fluid ounces. Well, there's going to be some still floating around in the system, so I'm going to go with 11, just because I know there's some in there. If I was changing all the components, I know that it would use that. But as far as when we go to charge, you'll see here it says excursion except for GCC and excursion built for. GCC is Gulf Cooperation Council, which is basically the Middle East. So a lot of the Middle East vehicles had different specs for their air conditioning and cooling systems, just because it's so god-awful hot there all the time. So, but because this is except a Gulf Cooperation Council country, it'll be 4 pounds 4 ounces for when we go to charge it. So what I'm going to do is, this bottle is 8 ounces of oil. So we're going to pop this guy off, and we're going to pour oil in here. Okay. So we'll set the accumulator there and put this back on it. Little plug. Screw this stud in because it's loose. Now the accumulator comes with new seals right here. So we're gonna go ahead and set this there. Now this large O-ring is going to go here. Get this guy off. Let's compare them. Get the little fella. Right there. Now it might want me to use this little metal guy instead of the orange O-ring. Let's see what it does. Yeah, it's looking like it wants me to use that instead. So we'll see what happens. Then it's wanting this little guy right here. Oh cool, it already came with one. Makes it easy. Set that aside. And then the end of this guy will go. So we'll go ahead and rock the accumulator into place. Take the little cap off. It makes it a little easier for us. Spread the plastic. Turn it. And that looks like that's all she wrote. So I'm going to go ahead and put all the little clippies back on, and we'll go from there. Accumulator's mounted. Now we're going to go ahead and put the O-ring on this fella.
Oh, sweet. It already came with one. Well, now, that was rather nice of them. Lube it up a little bit. Then we will rotate it into place. You notice I didn't put that screw back yet. Now, threads on this had a little bit of crap on them, so I kind of had to clean them up a bit. All right, that's tight. Let's snug it up. All right. Gotta get it on there. Get pretty damn tight. Now, if there's a leak, we'll know when we run the vacuum. So, let's go ahead and put the little screw back in. Okay, it's tight. Now we'll go ahead and lock this little clippy back onto itself. Then this is the little clamp that helps secure the orifice tube, make sure it doesn't pop out. And we're gonna go ahead and put the low pressure switch back. Take a little bit of oil, get on there, so it's not dry. Snug it up and plug it in. Alrighty, now we're gonna go ahead and get the compressor ready. Okay, we got the compressor now. This right here, this little sticker says add oil here. This compressor is pre-charged with 3 ounces of oil. So the system holds 14. I wanted to put 11. So we already have 3 in there in the compressor, and this little can is 8, so 3 plus 8 is 11. So I'm just going to go ahead and add the rest of the contents of this can to the compressor. Show you how to do that. Go ahead and take this off. Okay, now you have S and D. S is suction, which is the large line coming from the accumulator, and D is discharge, which is the line going out to the condenser. So we're gonna go ahead and put it on the suction side. Just be careful not to let it overflow. We want to add the oil here so that it doesn't run dry when we start it. So that's a pretty good load of oil in there. And what we'll have to do, okay, so we'll look at the compressor, and these are like little hollow dowels. So take a look at the other one. These little dowels go on the front, so we're gonna go ahead and put them on the front. Let's go ahead and get a little hammer and knock them into place. All right. Get them started. Okay, so compressor's ready to go on. What we're gonna do, take the oil rag and discard it, and take this clean towel and go around the outer diameter of this fitting where it bolts to the compressor and make sure there's no contamination. Doesn't look like there is. So we'll take our compressor and rotate it into place, and then go ahead and take this line and get it ready. Take this bolt from the other one. Let's get it started. And tilt these lines. There we go. Now you want to try to do this fairly quick. You don't want to leave the compressor or the system open for too long, because the oil in refrigeration systems loves to attract water. So if your system's open for too long, it's gonna absorb water, and then you're gonna have to run it on the vacuum for a long time. So that is down. Now let's go ahead and address this. Pull the little clear protector off. Set that down in there. Actually, sprinkle a little oil on it. Line it up with the stud and push it down. Snug it down. All right, well, I went ahead and snugged it down, and it just didn't feel like it was gonna work right. So I greased this O-ring up, the one that came off. We're gonna go ahead and put it back. It just didn't feel right. I don't know why they gave us that instead of the O-ring, but we're gonna use the O-ring. Line that up. And snug it down. Boom. Time for the bolts. Now, before I put them in, went ahead and wire brushed them off and kind of cleaned them, just so they wouldn't be as inclined to bind up. And it never hurts. Get them in there nice and tight without binding. Cross pattern just like a wheel. All right, the bolts are in. So we're gonna go ahead and put the belt on. Make sure that there's nothing in the way. Line that under there. Go around the power steering and put the ratchet on the tensioner, making sure it doesn't touch the battery. And that's done, and we got to plug the compressor clutch in. Just like that. Got that on, got that on, got that on, all that's tight. So, I'm gonna go ahead and start getting it ready to vacuum it down. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and connect all our ports. Now you can see right here it says close and open. We're gonna open it so it depresses the little valve in there. I actually like this set a lot because some of the other sets you just clip on and it can dump quite a bit of refrigerant if the little Schrader needle gets stuck in there, but this one you can actually unscrew before you pull it off, so you lose the minimum. And go ahead and open this side. And make sure I don't hook anything with that. And now, gonna go ahead and get our vacuum pump. All right, now we're gonna talk about vacuum pumps. Now, this is a vacuum pump. This is a cheapo little Harbor Freight one. I primarily use for automotive if I'm at the house doing something. Now, shops, like we have one at our shop, it's a rolling machine and it has a jug of refrigerant on it, it has a vacuum pump, it has a recovery cylinder. So normally if you drive your truck into a shop and they go to do AC work, the machine will drain all the refrigerant, store it inside, and then when they do the work, when they're done, it'll vacuum it, pump all the air out, and then recharge it. But since this one had already dumped because the shaft seal failed, it was already flat, so there was no need to recover it. But if you do AC work, you have to have a EPA license to handle the refrigerant. But anyway, so this is a vacuum pump. Now, like I told you, these are sealed systems. Unless you're, taking the lines apart and unscrewing things and stuff, there's no way to, see how much refrigerant's in it. So there's no real way to like open the top of something like the coolant jug and top it off. But that being said, if you have moisture in the system, it's really difficult to remove. Because if you had a section of PVC pipe and it was open on both ends, and say you had some water in the middle of it, you could put like a shop vac hose on it and it would probably suck the little drops of water to the end of the vacuum. Well, the problem being is that this is a sealed system. There's no way to do that, because if I sucked through the low side, it would pull air in through the high side, and you don't want any air in this system because it's such a small system that any air in there will take place of the refrigerant and it's not going to work as well. So here's pretty much the conundrum. Okay, so how would you get the moisture out of a system that's sealed on one side? Now say this is the AC system, and for all intents and purposes, let's just say it's sealed right there. So if you were trying to use your shop vac, you wouldn't be able to suck anything out because this end is sealed, so anything in there's not going to want to go like that. So you have little droplets of water sitting in here. And how do you get them out? You can't shove a towel in there to stop them up. So what you do, you're going to trip out on this, is use a vacuum pump. Now if you look, this is the pressure temperature chart for water. Now you'll see water at no inches of vacuum boils at 212 atmosphere. So basically, if we were to like set up a little campfire right here and boil water, it would boil at 212 degrees. Now, if you've ever gone camping at elevation, you know that water will boil easier when you're at higher elevation. So what the vacuum pump does is it puts the system under a vacuum. And it's just like, going up in an airplane. The higher you go, the thinner the atmosphere is, so the less air pressure there is. Now, perfect vacuum is like space. There's no air, no nothing, so there's no pressure whatsoever. So in space, water would boil really, really easily. So if you look here, 212 at 0 inches of vacuum. But as you start increasing the vacuum, the boiling point goes down. It's literally the opposite of your cooling system. The cooling system raises the pressure. It keeps the water under pressure, which makes the boiling point of the water go up, which is why, you're driving along and say your car is 225, you're okay, but the second you open the cap and release all the pressure, the water is going to flash boil to steam. Well, water will turn to steam as well when it's in a vacuum. So you can see as I'm increasing the inches of vacuum, the boiling point's going down. So you get to 29.82 inches of vacuum, water will boil at 21 degrees. Yeah, I said that right. 21 degrees. At 29.74 inches of vacuum, water will boil at freezing. So I'm going to show you exactly how this vacuum pump works on your AC system. Okay, now this is a glass with some just normal tap water out of the sink. I mean, it's not some weird chemical, nothing. I'll drink some. Standard water. So what we're going to do, pour it in this little pan. Now, this is what's called a vacuum chamber. They use it for science experiments and whatnot, but it will put the water under a vacuum. So we're going to go ahead and start the vacuum pump. Now, as you can see, the vacuum valve is closed and the atmospheric valve is open. So we're going to go ahead and open the
vacuum inlet valve. Now, it's not creating vacuum because this valve is open, but we're gonna go ahead and close it. Now you can see it's already up to 20 inches of vacuum. It's going towards 25. Now look it's at 25 inches of vacuum. Look at the water. That's legitimately boiling. That is what it's doing. It's boiling the water. And you can see it turning it to steam, and it's sucking it through the hose and puking it out there. Now, this is room temperature. It's like 50 outside right now. It's not hot. Water doesn't have to get hot to create, or in order to boil. So that's how the vacuum pump works. It just puts the whole system under such a vacuum that any water that's in there boils off. Just like in here, it turns these guys to steam, and then the steam wafts through the system and gets carried out by the vacuum pump, leaving a perfectly clean, dry vacuum system that's ready to accept the correct amount of refrigerant, because once it's pumped down completely, we can get the full refrigerant volume in there and make it run as efficiently as possible. So if I leave this on long enough, it will continue to boil off the water until there's nothing there. Now watch when I reverse it and open the valve, it's gonna stop. See? It's normal water. Now I'm gonna go ahead and show you guys how to use the vacuum pump on your AC system. You just take this manifold gauge hose. Now the center hose on this is what's called the process tube. That's where you would add refrigerant from a cylinder or remove it or apply vacuum. So these manifold gauge sets can be picked up anywhere. This one I think actually came from Harbor Freight a long time ago, and it's been nothing but good to me. So go ahead and flip the vacuum pump on. The oil's reading a little high, but that's okay because it's at a slight angle. So flip that on. We're going to go ahead and open these. And you can see these are already open. You can see it pulling it down slowly. So it's at about 15. It's gonna come down to 20. Now you don't want to do it too quick, because if you suck it down too quick, you can actually turn some of the water in the system into ice. Because like I was showing you, as pressure goes up, boiling point goes down, but if you get it down into the negatives, it can actually freeze. And you can see all the vapor coming out right here. So I'm gonna leave this on for probably about 10 minutes. And once it's done, we will go ahead and come back. All right, it has been about 20 minutes. So we're gonna go ahead and close the system off. Start with the high side. Close this. Close the low. Close our gauges and shut the vacuum off. Now the weight on here says the excursion accept GCC countries, 4 pounds 4 ounces. There's 16 ounces in a pound, so 4 times 16 is 64. So you look at that, that's a lot of freaking refrigerant, but that's because it has rear AC. So each can is 12 ounces, so 12, 24, 36, 48, 60, and then it wants 4 pounds 4 ounces, so 12, 24, 36, 48, 60, then 64 plus 4 ounces would be 8. So it wants 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and basically 3/4 of a can. So that's what we're gonna do. Vacuum pump is already done and shut down, so we're gonna get it out of the way. Now when you're done doing this, if it's like a really contaminated system or it's been open and you're doing a full overhaul, it's a good idea to change the oil on the vacuum pump, because as you can see, it's kind of cloudy. It's because there's water in it. So I'm just gonna use this little thing that comes on like the cans from the auto parts store. I'm trying to make it as, you know, simple for somebody who's doing it in their driveway. So we're gonna take the can, squeeze the trigger, charge it so that there's refrigerant in the hose, so when we hook up, it doesn't have a slug of air in there. So that's closed.
pop this off, and we're gonna pop this on. Now, sometimes the Schrader valve in there will stick, and so it'll try to suck air in. So that's why I pre-charge the hose, just in case it does stick. You don't want it trying to suck air in, because these valves are basically made to keep refrigerant from leaking out. They're not as good from keeping air leaking in, because they're meant to be under pressure and not a vacuum. So what's gonna happen is we're gonna start filling the system now. You wanna fill these cans upside down, because the liquid's on the bottom, the gas is on the top. But what's gonna happen is it's gonna reach a point where it's not gonna suck any more in, because the system's equalized. And like I explained earlier, we need the compressor to create suction on the suction line. So we're gonna go ahead and start adding. Now, if you think you've had a leak or you've had a problem with the system, you can turn the vacuum off and leave it sitting there. And if there's a leak, the vacuum will break, and you'll actually see the pressure creeping closer to zero, so that's when you can find a leak. But at that point, you can fill it with nitrogen, and you'll hear the hissing. So this system, you know, knock on metal, has been pretty good. Just the compressor was tired. As you'll recall, last time we did pretty much everything. Did the condenser, the evaporator, and or no, we didn't do the evaporator on this one. We just did everything else. So we're gonna go ahead and start filling it. And when it gets enough, you'll actually hear this switch click. And once the switch clicks, that means that it'll allow the compressor clutch to engage. But it's probably gonna take a lot before it'll do that. So I'm gonna go ahead and start adding the cans. All right, it took all the cans except this last one without me having to start the motor. So we're gonna go ahead and do that. I'm gonna get this guy on and stick it in the vent, and we'll see what happens. Now when you do this, you want to set the AC on max and turn both zones on if it's so equipped. And fire it up. Max AC, and let it get going. Okay, we're gonna add the 3/4 of the last can right now. All right. Oh yeah, it's working great. Granted, it's cold outside, but see what it's doing. Yeah, that's cold. And as you bring the RPMs up, it moves more air across the condenser and spins the compressor faster, so the temp will actually go down. So I'm quite happy with it. Oh yeah, that's frickin' really cold. Yeah, 39-degree air. Granted, it's like 50 out, but still, that's freaking cold. But that's pretty much how you do it, guys. I mean, it's not that hard of a thing to do. Save yourself a lot of money versus, you know, taking it somewhere to have it done. But yeah, it would run okay. You know, during like last summer after I did all the work, it would work okay. But when you'd slow down or get into a drive-through or something, and there wasn't enough air over the condenser, the compressor would just start making a bunch of racket, and I could tell it was tired. So I've just been meaning to do this. I got to do a bunch of other stuff on this thing, so you guys will obviously see it. But yeah, that's how you replace a compressor on a 7.3. I mean, it's going to be the same all the way back, you know, except, you know, the pickups won't have those two lines for the rear heat and air. But yeah, it's pretty straightforward, guys. If you like the content, subscribe, leave me some comments, and I'll see you on the next one. I appreciate the support. Have a good day. Later.